Okay, it is 6 o'clock. Let's call the meeting of the, what do we call this group? Community Development Committee. To order, let's stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Kinnaman.
Yes, here.
Delaney.
Here.
Musgrave. Here.
We're all here, and so we are going to begin tonight. We have the order of the meeting is that we have a couple of presentations. We have one from Holly Township on an additional site option, and then H2A is also going to give us a report on the assessment that they have done, and then we will talk about kind of next steps from there. Okay, so I would like to invite Mr. Cullis if he would like to come and make his presentation.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you turned the heat up tonight. It is incredibly warm in here, and everybody's going to look nice and shiny by the time the meeting's done. Let me start by passing out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's right. Would you have one extra one or no?
No,
Okay.
I brought one because I thought it was
Okay.
And you notice your copy got taken with it. Okay. So what I'm here tonight to talk about is an opportunity that's in front of us. It's not a brand new concept, as you can see by the cover page, that the village and the township shared space way back in the 1890s through a joint effort through the township hall that was built. If you read that plaque that's on the front of the building, it talks about it. And the two governments shared equally in the planning, the funding. The hall has been used for municipal offices, a fire station, a jail, polling places, as a setting for social, cultural, and political gatherings. Village offices remained here till 1958. The township offices till 1982. When I read that today, I thought that was interesting because we're still there, but apparently they had moved out of that building, and then a fire put them back into the building. That's a part of Holly's history I hadn't heard before, but that's why that plaque says what it does. So, and after that, the village and the township for many years were right across the street from each other, which is kind of what this opportunity is in front of us today. The township purchased the property that was formerly known as Dawson Tire. It's over on Grange Hall Road. And we have an opportunity to share that space and give the residents a one-stop shopping opportunity. For those of us that work in the daily operations, we know how often we send people back and forth between the buildings. Unfortunately, because of the way some of the information gets shared, they make multiple trips back and forth. The municipal complex would allow everybody a one-stop shopping experience for the residents instead of traveling back and forth across town. The partnership bringing the two government entities that serve Holly community into one accessible location. This isn't a new concept. We've been talking about it. Jerry and I have met and talked about it. We've looked at different opportunities. When I first became the supervisor, we looked at the township sharing space right here in this building. Unfortunately, the space that was available had literally not one window opportunity in it. And the other issue was the exit clause within the contract that you guys are well aware of. So that was one that we didn't look into. After that, Jerry and I had a couple of meetings talking about how could we share some space, and one of the concepts was the car dealership, Joseph Pontiac. After the village had remodeled the fire hall, we talked about what about moving down there. At the time, the costs were there. The village was talking about the marijuana thing, and before we know it, there was an offer on that building that tied that up. From that point, the township needs more space. We put our goals and aspirations on the farmstead. And we said, well, we'll put the township office out there as part of that project. As we got into doing our research on that project, our due diligence, if you will, we found that the flood zones wouldn't allow us the walkout basement we had hoped for, meaning storage would have to go on the second floor, and that would require an elevator. Expanding the building in its size would take up more of the farmstead, leaving less space for the opportunities for the kids, which is part of the concept in that plan. At that point, there was an opportunity, we thought, to purchase the land across the street from the farmstead. Had a couple meetings with the gentleman who owned that land, talked to Jerry about it, and the one problem with it was that it was outside the village limits, which would make it difficult for the village to move to that property. From a township standpoint, we were too far apart on cost involved. There's about 300 acres out there, so it was quite an expensive project, and then you'd have to break it down and sell off pieces, and that didn't work. As the current president of the Chamber of Commerce, I came to a meeting one morning, and Scott Roper announced that Dawson Tire was going to be leaving Holly. The school had called to order some tires, and they refused the order because they were pulling out. After that meeting, I called Chuck Truen. I know Chuck because the township sold the property to him right after I came into office, and then I worked closely with him through the pandemic because they had a line contract with the township, and we had to work out some arrangements there with them. In that conversation with Chuck, I found out that he didn't know they were leaving either. After a week or so, he called me back, and the details were that they were pulling out. He was the owner of the property. Dawson Tire was not. So he was going to be looking for a new tenant. I met with Chuck. We went over the opportunity. He was getting ready to list the property. I asked him not to do that. I met with the township board, got back with Chuck. Over a 2-week process, we made the purchase of the 7.6 acre parcel, which has currently a 9,500 square foot building on it. Our needs assessment study said that we needed between 8,000 and 10,000 square feet. This opportunity allowed us to save about $2.5 million over the concept on the farmstead, because as we went forward on that, we were taking up more land on the farmstead. The costs were going up because we don't have infrastructure there. The land wouldn't perk. We would have had to put an engineered septic field, and the only place that would work on the property was almost 500 feet away from where the building would be. The costs just kept continuing to go up on that building. This allowed us an opportunity. The fact that it had 7.6 acres and it was in the village, all of the infrastructure's there. It's my understanding when the plumbing was put in for the sewers, it was a 6-inch pipe was put in, so the capacity was enlarged. That report came from the fire department. So the property has potential. I'm here in front of you tonight to talk about that and to invite you to sit down at the table with us, with the other parties involved. I'll be making the same presentation to the library board as they're in the process of their long-term goals and what they want to do. I think what's interesting is in the initial conversation I had with Jerry, I talked about how big the other properties were that the village had, and when I had asked him about the DPW, he thought that that was about a 5 or 6 acre parcel. The maps you show in front of you tonight show that the Holly Township Library is 1 3/4 acres. The Village Holly Police Department is 0.74 acres. and the Village of Holly DPW is 2.29 acres. The total of those three is 4.78 acres, or 4.75 acres. We have 7.6 acres there, so there's room for growth. There's room for short-term planning immediately, and then there's room for long-term planning. One of the positives about that is if all of the entities end up on one property, then the other buildings that are currently owned, the police department, the library, the DPW, as time goes by, those are available to the private sector and they go back on the tax rolls. This property is not a concept for 10 or 15 years. This is a concept, as that 1890 shows you, that building's been involved for over 130 years. The opportunity here is for the next 100 years, long beyond the time we're here. But it can serve the community. There's also room in there we've had people talk about a community center. I've been working with the Cultural and Arts for the state of Michigan. They have grant monies available for that kind of a project. And the township qualifies because we own the property and it's free and clear. So there's opportunities to even have that join the project going forward. I don't know the details of those. The plan isn't set in stone. It's an opportunity. We invite you as the village to sit down with the township, and if the library would sit down in those initial conversations, we'd enjoy that too, and to take a look at it. I did have, we had met because we were working on the township hall at the farmstead. We had met with an architect, AKA architect, and I know the village, that's one of the companies that you looked at for your needs assessment as well, so they had met with the village. And in talking to them, they drew up a couple of concepts. Now understand, nothing is written in stone. Obviously, everybody would have to sit down and discuss what works and what doesn't work. But it gives you an idea to look at what something like this might look like. Yes, it requires an addition to the building, but the township already knows we're planning on spending money to make the building fit our specific needs. But again, in light of a $4.5 million investment at the farmstead, right now we're at $1.68 million, and it makes it a whole lot more feasible. Again, these are concepts. They were put together by AKA that had some knowledge of what the village was looking at. And the back drawing just kind of shows you what's available on the property and how future uses could look. And the nice part about it is you've pretty much got one-stop shopping. There's room for additional building, there's room for additional space. Currently, there's a paved parking lot with 21 spaces on it, so it meets the immediate needs of the building. With the additions, we do realize that the village has a deadline that they have to move. The township is not up against that deadline, so we have the flexibility of working with you there. The other opportunity that comes with this property, I have another set of pictures for that, is this is an aerial view of the property that we're talking about, and it shows the library in the upper right corner. It's parcel number 005. It aligns perfectly with the back of the township's property, which would allow, with the acquisition of a couple of smaller parcels in between. And I've already talked to the real estate lister for the property that's currently for sale next to and behind the Foot Doctor. And we would reach out to Tim Hortons if that was something we decided we wanted to look into, to see if they would perhaps be willing to sell the back part of their parcel, which when you look in the aerial view, they don't currently use. So that's just another one of the opportunities or possibilities that this property affords. So that's the opportunity we would like to explore. I would extend an invitation to this committee to both tour the building, to sit down with additional conversations, and to look at it. As I said, while there's nothing in stone at this time, and the township is looking at what we need to do with the property, we have time on our side as opposed to you guys are up against a timeline. So we're able to work with you there. Thank you.
So, George, I would say just stay there if we have some questions
Okay.
for you, maybe. Do either of you have questions for Mr. Cullis?
I do. You said you spent 1.6 mil on this new place?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What did you sell it for previously?
We sold it, right after I came into office, we sold it for $400,000. Between the time, if you look at that aerial view of the building, the two center rooftops, it was a 2-bay, 1-office fire hall when we sold the property. In 2017, they put a $575,000 addition on the front of the building, which is the additional space. They also added 2 bays and a loading dock to the back of the building. And I believe those are, I think they have 16-foot ceilings in that. Brian, is that about accurate? The back 2 bays? In there. They also put in the 2-acre gravel parking lot that you see in the back. They had to bring in, I've been told, about 8 inches of 23 AA so they could get their heavy equipment on it without sinking in the ground. They stored all their tires there, as you'll see in that picture. And they also had to put in a stormwater retention pond. So those are the improvements they put into the land from the time they bought it from us.
It equates to 1.6 million from what you sold it for?
Market-wise, it does, yeah.
Seems like a lot of money. How much is this addition for the village offices?
So we don't have numbers in front of us yet. We're at the preliminary stage. It's impossible to come up with numbers until we sit down. Those are concepts. I'm sure that when you look at them, somebody might want to move things, change things. That's what has to be talked about.
I'm just meaning based on the diagram that you have here.
We didn't do pricing on it.
You haven't, okay.
It was just a concept. What we have to do is once you realize what we want, that's when they will actually sit down and do the cost analysis, and then the township would look at it. Going forward, the township would probably look at financing a project like that. Jerry and I, along with Dave Noose from the school district a few years back, we went down and visited South Lyon. City of South Lyon did a partnership with the schools down there. They took over a building, and the schools sold the building to the city for $1. Then the city put in all the investment. Then they turned around and leased back to the school the space that they needed. And that was designed to like a 20-year lease, which paid for the build-out. And then once the lease was done, there was no more lease necessary because it's all owned by the taxpayer. City of Wixom has done this. The Village of Milford has done this. There's several communities that have done this. So we're not inventing the wheel. We're just looking at shared services like so many communities do. I had an opportunity about a week ago to drive through the new concept, or the new, the new property in Wixom. And when you pull in there, they have in the center of, you pull in the driveway and the city offices are on this side, the library is on the other side, and there's land toward the back of it for buildings to come. I haven't seen the master plan. They had a big fountain in the middle, but it was a pretty impressive complex. So I know other communities have done this. Somebody was telling me Troy has. I know if you talk to the architects like AKA, they're familiar with the projects that have been out there because these are the folks that do that stuff. So one of the things that might even come of the committee if we put together and start looking at it, when we looked at the farmstead concept, I set up 2 bus tours, and we took interested people from Holly, and we toured Tollgate Farm, and we toured the Bauer Farm, and we toured the Van Hoven Farm out in Rochester, and Turtle Creek and Metro, Kensington Metro. These were other places that were doing what we were talking about doing here. So it actually gave you an opportunity to ask questions, walk around, and see how other communities, other groups have already done a project like this. And those are some of the things I would recommend that we do here, is take that opportunity to go and see what's out there, see how other people have put it together, visit and look at the contracts and how they put those together. I know we did that when we went to South Lyon. That was, what, probably 6 years ago? Yeah, what was when Dave Noose was here. But they had put together a concept that's probably been going on now for a good 10 plus years. I know at one point the school decided they needed more room in that project they had down there. They took an old school similar to the one we have on College Street, the venue at 111, and they retrofitted it. You walk in the main door and the boardroom was in front of you. They had the lobby there. The city was on one side and the schools were on the other side. Well, the schools decided they needed more room. So on a separate venue, they just added to the other end of the building, and they take care of that. But I know that the goal was, once the 20-year lease was done, there would be no more lease payment. There was an agreement that talked about how do we handle repairs, and you have 40% of the building, we have 60%, and that's how the breakdown. So those kind of details would have to be worked out going forward. But the beauty of it is the property's already sold. It's already owned by the taxpayer. So we don't need a lease anywhere in the future other than to cover build-out costs. But it's not a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because they did it back in the 1890s, but it's probably a once-in-our-lifetime opportunity. That it would just happen that the village and township need new space at the same time. Any other questions?
Anything, Mr. Delaney?
Looks like
Not
Ryan's
this
getting.
Not at this
No.
time?
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that's good. Thank you, Mr. Cullis. At this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Walker to introduce our H2A representatives to us.
Yeah, certainly. So the council, early on, they had requested that a needs assessment be done. And so we reached out to two different architectural firms, the first being AKA, which Mr. Cullis referenced, and we met with and interviewed them. And then a referral from Rowe Professional Services was for H2A with Ms. Hoist and her partner, Bailey, last name? Ramirez. And so that is who we recommended to council, was H2A. We felt that they could best meet our needs in providing this needs assessment. And so that's what they're here tonight to present their study that they did. And of course, their study, their mission is a little different than that Supervisor Cullis presented tonight. Much of what Supervisor Cullis presented is conceptual, because that's what it is at this point. There's nothing concrete, no real concrete structures to evaluate, or final layout, or who all the players are going to be. And really, it came so late in the game because of the sale of the property that H2A didn't have the opportunity to even evaluate the scope of the property. So it's different. So they will present on Sherman Middle School as well as Cyclone Park, located at 504.5 Maple. And of course, Cyclone Park is a park owned by the village. And the only thing I would say before I turn it over to the two consultants is that with the two assessments that H2A did, I mean, there is kind of a definite range in costs, where I would say there is not with the township thing. It just depends on what's decided in the end. But if you're constructing multiple buildings, you're not talking a few $100s difference. So that's the only thing I would say to keep in mind. And of course, this committee, it's my understanding that this committee does not decide on building design, but only location of future complex. But I think that the information that H2A has for us will be valuable. So, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, your packet that you have there before you tonight has 3 different components to it. It's got kind of a narrative and cost informational component that we'll go through. There's a timeline schedule, just kind of as a general, where should we be at what point, depending on what scenario we choose to follow. And then there's the space assessment with the square footage charts and some conceptual diagrams. So we looked at those 2 buildings. We actually considered a number of different scenarios or options, but really honed in on 2 strong ones, which were, we labeled scenario 1A and 2A. 1A being at Sherman Middle School. Sherman Middle School has about 7,500, almost 7,600 square feet available in what would be considered like a little wing of the building that was somewhat separate from the rest of the building, where the village could have its own kind of module there. It's a lot of square footage there, and it's not easily dividable off to another use. It's kind of like you rent this, lease this 7,600 square feet, or nothing. It's just not very easy to divide up and separate off. It's probably substantially more than what you actually need. So, for instance, an office might be a classroom, something similar like this. A conference room would be a classroom. Some of the spaces we were able to divide up into smaller offices, but there's a lot of square footage there, and to avoid extensive remodeling, we kind of used some spaces the shapes that they were. So existing conditions often gives you some existing geometry that you're trying to work with. Some classrooms had windows, other spaces did not, so we needed to do some renovation to that extent as well. So on your little diagrams there, your color diagrams, the space chart indicates how much square footage is proposed at Sherman Middle School in the last column. And that's simply because that's how much square footage exists there now that they have available for you to lease there. And then we just did some simple conceptual diagramming on the last page of your documents there. That just showed how the space might be utilized. There's an existing circulation corridor that we would attempt to reuse that as much as we could in the configuration. And then, like I said, some of these classroom type spaces would be just used in their entirety. There is quite a need for storage that you might not think about, but there's almost 1,000 square feet of storage there. Some pros and cons. I'm going to let Bailey talk about some of the pros and cons at Sherman Middle School.
Okay, yeah. So for Sherman, I'll start with the cons. So there's no equity. It's a lease location, so it's not a purchased property. The parking is kind of an extensive walk from where you would actually enter the building, which kind of lends a hand to poor visibility for people who are visiting. They might get lost or not know exactly where to enter. You are paying extra for unneeded space, like as Jackie had said, classroom-sized offices, and there is also no promises of being evicted, similar to the current situation. So the pros for this one is that there's the least initial investment, so the upfront cost is going to be cheaper than Cyclone, and the quality of the space is very good right now. It is a large amount of space to work with, and the amount of rehabilitation needed is minimal compared to Cyclone. So
we did go to the extent of putting some cost projections on these scopes of work. You see there in your first narrative report that the projection is it could be somewhere in the range of $415,000 to renovate that. And that includes what we would consider as, we call them soft costs to the project, such as permits and contingencies and architecture and engineering fees, some of those types of elements that get added to the project costs after your bid day costs. We do see costs varying quite a bit right now because the bid climate is so dynamic. You'll see projects that only get one bid right now. You'll see projects that get 5 or 10 bids. It's really hit or miss. It has something to do with what time of year that you're bidding it, but since the pandemic, even that has been difficult to pin down. So we're seeing contractors bidding anywhere from 30% below estimates to 30% or more above estimates. It all depends on the level of interest, what time of year we're trying to bid it, what else is out there that we're competing against with their interest in bidding projects. So there are large swings right now in bid costs. There's a second report that looks very similar to the first one. And what it really does for you is it nets out what you might expect a contractor's bid to be. So it would not consider any of those extra soft costs on a project. So where we indicate Sherman Middle School maybe being $415,000, including all project costs, your contractor's bid costs might be somewhere in the range of $326,000. And then toward the end of each of those reports, we kind of give you that range on the last page where, you know, well, we might say this is $415,000. Well, you might expect bids anywhere from $300,000 to $550,000, that you can have a big range. And, you know, it's all about forecasting, you know. What are the contractors going to be bidding on next spring? It's about forecasting that. What is the inflation going to do between now and next spring? So there's a number of dynamics that affect those numbers. And so you need to be prepared in these days to have big swings in the range. We also control the range somewhat in the quality of the construction and the materials and the equipment, but it just big swings in contractors' bids these days. So I guess you can kind of see there's a number of cons to that site. You know, it's a lot bigger than what you need. It's tough for people to get there from the parking lot. Kind of easy to get lost there. Cyclone Park, on the other hand, is about almost 3,800 square feet. Our recommended square footage, to have the ideal situation, would be about 4,500 square feet. So Cyclone Park's a little bit small. Sherman is really way too big. And Cyclone would really benefit from a future addition to it to get it from its existing 3,800 square feet up to that 4,500, which would accommodate things like your meeting room. There's some diagram there on the second to the last page of how that existing building might be configured, just kind of a concept for it. The spaces at the far left would be that future addition for council chambers and for additional storage. Otherwise, we would take the spaces as they are today. We would divide them up further to create these office type spaces, because right now it's a couple of kind of wide open spaces in there, and develop that in from the old ambulance services into the office space for the village. Okay, pros and cons. I'm going to let Bailey jump back in there.
Okay, so again, I will start with cons. This building will need extensive rehabilitation. It's pretty much gutted like a garage. It would need insulation, flooring, like everything. It does have a higher initial investment. It's going to cost more upfront, but it will have higher equity. And at this time, there is no space for a large gathering space. There is conference areas, but nothing like this space here. That would be a part of a future addition. But the pros, again, the high equity. It is easy access for staff and public. The parking is directly adjacent. It is a long-term option because you would own it. There would be no chance of eviction. It is appropriately sized for all the offices and spaces, and the building would not be shared with like a school or community, so it would just have the one use, easier for wayfinding, and it revitalizes an unused building that's owned. and it does have space for future expansion on the lot.
So the overall cost to rehab that building, and it needs to be rehabbed both interior and exterior. The roof needs to be replaced, but I think you guys have got that scheduled already. But the siding needs to be updated. It's pretty worn and just needs some exterior improvement along with the interior. So the estimate, including the soft costs, those extra costs that go on a project, is about $722,000, something in that range. Again, bids can swing quite a bit above and below that, so that could be $500,000 to $950,000. If we're just looking at the contractor's cost alone, probably something around $578,000, not including those soft costs. So if you're looking at a contractor's bid, might be something right in that range. Again, could swing low or high, could be $400,000 or $750,000, depending on, again, some of those controllable things like quality, equipment choices, some of those things, along with just the bid climate, as we call it, what's going on out there, what's forcing bids up or down.
And I would say another item to note for pros and cons as we get into the timeline, with Sherman Middle School, there would have to be 2 moves. We would be moving into a temporary office and then moving into the final office just because of how lease end and start dates are. So you would have the cost of a temporary office and the cost of an additional move, whereas you would not have that with Cyclone.
Sherman gives you a little bit more time to dilly-dally and make this decision, or weigh it over and think about it, because you don't have to reserve as much time to get the work accomplished at Sherman. If you were going to go into Cyclone, you'd have to move along a little bit more directly with your decisions and determining your direction that you're going to go. Make sure you had your architects, engineers on board, and you'd really want to be bidding that project out probably by the end of this year or early next year, and allowing probably a year for construction. Now, a year for construction seems like a lot of time, but it's all because of lead times right now. Some pieces of equipment can take 6 months to arrive to the site. So we really have to leave some extra time for those things to be ordered and get to the site so that they're ready for build time. So there's some pros and cons in those schedules. Again, you've got a little time to think things over a little longer with Sherman, and you need to move along a little more directly with Cyclone. So, do you have any questions?
I have one.
Okay.
What do you use for your projections? What, is it a program, or is it like Bach, or like the insurance companies use?
For our cost estimating?
Mm-hmm.
There are national guides that we use, but we also use the other projects that we're bidding in the general area within like 50, 60 miles of your location. Those are the projects that we're looking at that we've bid out. How much was renovation here? And we kind of track those year by year, and then we use those factors, and we also kind of weigh that against what level of quality are you looking for, and then we actually go through and do a pretty detailed cost projection based on unit costs of square footage of walls, square footage of counters, things like that. So we do a pretty detailed takeoff on it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Or?
Mr. Delaney, anything?
Not at this time.
Okay.
I know this might be a crazy throw out there, but in anything that you've caught on this third option, any comparisons that you see just as a first glance?
In terms of going in together with the township.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's certainly a lot about the concept of how you're going to operate and how you're going to organize. So it's a whole organizational change, and that would be one of the key things that might draw you to that solution versus either of the other locations. It does kind of dictate that there's going to be some new construction. Wherever you look, whether it's with the township or somewhere else, you'll be looking for that 4,500 square feet, something in that range. So, you know, that means with their existing building that that's all going to be new construction. And so, you know, there's going to be a cost associated with new construction. Whether it's renovating Cyclone or building new at the township site, construction's kind of at an all-time high right now. And it just, you know, since the pandemic, you know, we got out of the pandemic, out of 2020, everybody said it's gonna start coming down. It did not come down. It continued to inflate, and construction inflation was at least double of what everybody else was feeling just in terms of cost of living inflation. Contractors were busier than ever. That's continued today because now we have these ARPA funds and other funds out there, and people want to do projects. And the dollars are available, and they have to get spent in the timeline, so the machine just keeps chugging along. And we have not seen costs come down yet. You know, there's been some relief in the lumber yards in terms of the lumber prices, but really in terms of contractors pricing projects, we just have not seen any relief, and it continues to go up. So, you know, that being said, it's an expensive time to do new construction. It's just part of the climate that we're in right now from a construction standpoint.
One of the comments that I think I caught Mr. Cullis make was that they have more time than we do, and that we could possibly move into existing space as opposed to new build for us, which could alter that timeline considerably too.
But wouldn't that be a second move to move back once the addition is completed?
What do you
Wouldn't that
mean?
be a second move? I mean.
No, he's talking about us moving into the existing,
Right,
and they would build a new section for
for
them.
themselves, okay.
And certainly renovation is much more cost effective than new construction.
Mhm.
And so, you know, depending on the relationship and the negotiation that you have with them, you know, that may help keep some of your costs of getting into that building down if you're in the renovated part versus the new construction.
But at the end of the day, we wouldn't own it versus a building that we own.
A building that you own and that you take care of and are responsible for, so.
Anything else for them?
I don't know if it's a question so much for our presenters, if it, as much as it's just a question for everyone to consider, what would be rent, what would be utilities, you know, if we were to go in with the township, and how does that factor in to that overall cost going forward, right? Because we might have a higher initial price tag, but over time, it might, you know, might well potentially be cheaper.
On the back side of the schedule sheet, we do have a list of items that's labeled criteria when evaluating other facilities, just to give you a general idea when looking at other places what we would recommend.
Kind of gives you your square footage there that you'd be looking for, how many parking spaces would be appropriate, some of that criteria.
Excuse me, I said township just there. I meant the Sherman Middle School.
Oh, with Sherman.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay.
If you were confused, which I wouldn't blame you.
Yeah, I know when you start looking at all of them, it starts like, okay, wait a minute. Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
So, yes, because I know that that was built into the current agreement for here, I believe, was that utilities were included in the rent. And so I don't know how that calculates into a new location, what they do with that as well.
As far as utilities at Sherman?
Mm-hmm. Did
So
they discuss
it was
that?
built into the contract. The contract itself was 3 or 4 times higher than what we have now, and I
Mhm.
believe the utilities were included in it. But, you know, there are a couple of major drawbacks to that location, as you've already discussed, and the consultants have discussed. It's a considerable length for people to traverse, especially elderly or handicapped. in order to get, back to the office space. And then you're really limited in what you can do. And as Jackie talked about, the lead construction time would not be as much at Sherman, but the reality of it is the village is not able to do that construction or renovation. That would be all school contractors, and so you're kind of at the mercy of their schedule. And that's one of the reasons that they said we would have to locate somewhere temporarily for who knows how long, we're not really sure. And then you'd move temporarily, you still have to set everything up, your phones, your IT, everything, and then turn around and move again. And then, of course, at the end of the day, whatever money it costs for the renovations, if, say it's $400,000, that's lost money because you don't own the building. So similarly, I have the same concern with the township building, although there may be avenues around it. But at the end of the day, whatever cost we invest, there's no road to ownership. And even if you end up in a situation where you have no lease, you still have no ownership. In relation to Cyclone, I did, after meeting with Jackie and Bailey and talking about construction costs and what we might expect, I did meet with 2 area local contractors, and both of them, while they don't have a detailed proposal, because they don't have a detailed plan from us of what we would want, both of them stated that it would be less than $500,000 to do the complete renovation there. So, I mean, that just gives you a ballpark. So really, they're all about the same cost. They're very similar in cost-wise. So I think really what it goes back to is for this committee of where do you want to recommend to the council that the village office be located at? Where is the best use for the community? And the only other thing I would offer out, regardless of what option the council decides to go to in the end, and as Jackie noted, the roof is something that needs immediate repair. So we have budgeted in this current budget for the roof, so that will detract some of the costs from there. But it's going to be substantial roof work to save that building. If the roof is not done this year, the village may as well look at demolition of the building and doing that. And just one other point is, I think that regardless of what the council decides to do, the overall use of Cyclone Park needs to be evaluated as part of that process too. If the council decides to have the village office not located at Cyclone, besides that building being done, the park itself needs some care. If the village office locates at Cyclone, I think it'll be a natural occurrence, and it's something that you own. But yeah, so that's all. I mean, you have options. I know you're not going to make a decision tonight, but I just think it's something to contemplate as you're going along.
One of the things that I think Mr. Cullis did was invited us to tour as well, that location. I'd like to suggest that we do that. We have toured the other 2. I think it would be wise to take the time to look at what that option does look like. So I'd like to see if we can schedule a tour of that location, and then I've kind of, when I've looked at this process a little bit, one of the things that I have heard is that the community wants to have input in at least being able to express some things to us. And the way I'd really like to see that done rather than just, you know, the people that come and get a couple minutes to speak, is that we would have maybe kind of like we do with the master plan, or they did with the design charrette type of thing, where we have some basics about the 3 different types or the 3 different locations, and have a opportunity for the community to come in, you know, like some daytime times, some evening times, where they can come in, look at those, and maybe fill out a survey on those a little bit that gives us some community feedback on what they're seeing in the 3 options. And then we would come back and actually make a decision off from those discussions.
So I'm just thinking out loud. Here we're looking at 3 further meetings of this committee, right? Before we make a recommendation to council.
Mhm.
So we'll have our tour of the Grange Hall
Right.
property. We'll have our, what would you want to say, community roundtable?
Sort
Or
of.
something like that?
Yeah.
We're
Right.
town hall.
Or town hall, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure what we officially call those in a
Probably a charrette.
presentation or something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And then our final meeting would be actually to deliberate
Mhm.
on our recommendation to
Mhm.
council. And what would our overall time frame, do you think, would be?
I think we could have our final meeting probably early August,
Oh,
you know. We have a couple of weeks here. If we go next week, I know this week is virtually impossible for me, but like first part of next week and do a tour.
mhm.
And then work on having some of this stuff prepared for, you know, some big board kinds of things,
Mhm.
and some general questions that would be usable. I would say before the end of the month. We're talking pushing time here pretty quick, but I don't think we need a lot of time in that, but I feel like a rushed decision can be misperceived by our community as well, that we want to take the time on this end, time for them to give us comment, and then another opportunity for us to actually come to, you know, a recommendation for council.
Here's something for me to throw a monkey wrench in.
Mhm.
After July 27th, I'm kind of out of it for 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm.
I'm having surgery, so I mean, I'm not supposed to even drive.
Yeah.
So if the first week of August, maybe even the second, I'm out of commission, probably.
Okay.
Perhaps, given that, we could combine those last 2 meetings, even though it might be a little long for a single meeting,
Mhm.
but, you know, where we would
I'm
have.
not wanting, everybody comes up for 4 minutes and talks. I really want to see that opportunity where we can sit around and somebody can sit there and look at things, fill out some questions, take some time, and really let it be a community feel of an event that also is not limited to the time frame of a meeting. You know, that you got to be here for a 6 o'clock meeting. We have the opportunity, you can come in, you know, 1 to 3 in an afternoon, or, you know, 4 to 6 in an evening, and actually take the time to look at the drawings, talk about the drawings, talk with your friend about the drawings, and then fill out a couple of survey questions that asks their opinion and any additional question that they may have, that we then come back to a meeting and really deal with.
We did that when we formed the DDA up north, when I lived up in Harrison, and we had more of an open house of what
Right.
we had sent out a survey first of all, and then the response that we got from people, we took back in, and we had different stations set up, as you were
Right.
referring to, for
Right.
people to come and ask questions. But we found that it was, at least for that group up there, which is very similar to Holly, they found that the evening times were more
Right,
easily
yeah.
accessed by
There,
people.
right, and so you offer both a daytime and an evening time, and I think we found that some, when we did the master plan, that more people did come in the evening
Yeah, we
than
didn't
they
even
did
offer
come during the daytime. And then what we heard from Roe was that was their largest attended open house type of event that they ever had from our community. So we do have a community that likes, you know, that's good at expressing their opinion to us. And so, you know, I would like to see us somehow make that happen.
Is there any of that that could not be accomplished electronically online if we provided our residents with, in one form or another, the materials that we've gotten?
I think we could do both.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. We could send out an electronic survey. Any results, you know, that we would get would be available, you know, to us for our purposes to consider. And then perhaps we could also take public comment at that meeting where we make the decision. So we have, you know, all the possible information
Yeah.
available, including public input, but we're making best use of our time.
Especially if we have to move quickly on this, even though we don't want it to appear quickly to the community, but in essence, we have to move quickly. So whatever we do, I mean, I believe she mentioned that we needed to start the bidding process by the end of the year.
Right.
So if we're August, September timeframe, that doesn't give us very much time to
Right.
move forward, so. I like the
Mr.
survey
Cullis was
idea.
raising his hand earlier.
I like the survey idea via email or hard copy, whatever. I'm sorry.
Come back up there then.
Yes. I just wanted to address one thing so that, to make it clear. Mr. Walker said without a lease, we don't have ownership. I didn't say there wouldn't be a lease. I didn't say there wouldn't be an agreement. I just said there wouldn't be the necessity for a lease payment. In other words, you wouldn't have to pay rent for being there. we might have an understanding and agreement. Might be a 50-year agreement or a 99-year agreement. We're all going to be there. All I said was there wouldn't be the necessity for a lease payment down that road once the build-out costs are paid for. And as you saw on that one concept drawing, if the village takes the existing space that's there, that addition on the back half of that building would be for the township. That would be a cost incurred by us. We're just talking about looking at build-out costs. So I just want to make that clear. Those are things that you sit down and talk about when you look at the agreements.
Thank you.
Do either of you have a daytime this week? During the day,
Friday.
Friday?
Let's see.
Well, afternoon,
The
any
14th?
day, but
Mhm.
more open on Friday.
I can do Friday.
If we did a tour on Friday, I could do that during the day on Friday.
Mhm.
What time?
Afternoon, you said, what time?
Morning?
Should I say- Yeah,
Say
that would
1
work.
o'clock on
Mhm.
Friday,
Yeah.
At what time?
1 PM Friday for a tour. Would that work, Mr. Cullis?
This week,
Mm-hmm.
you said 1 o'clock Friday?
Mm-hmm.
The 14th.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll do 1 PM on Friday for a tour at the Grange property owned by the township.
Where shall we meet?
I would say just meet there. And then that helps us with our timeline for other things.
Just so you know, I will not be available that day. I'll be out of town, but Director Clausen may be available.
Okay.
Is this gonna be like a public tour or what?
It is a committee meeting.
Okay.
You're welcome to attend, but
Right.
it would not be for question or comment, but we would be able to do question or comment. But you could see. Bring your eyes and ears.
Public comment.
No public comment.
Can you have public comment here?
No,
No.
it's a committee meeting. That's why I'm trying to schedule
Yeah.
the other type of meeting or event so that we
Mhm.
can have that public input that is in a way that we can gather the most information from the most people at one time.
So what week or day then, keeping Ms. Musgrave's schedule in
Right.
mind, would you look at having your final meeting? Because that will help determine your
Right.
public presentations.
Well, to
I
meet
mean,
your
we-
schedule, we'd have to do probably 2 weeks from today, the 24th.
24th or
Mhm.
25th?
Yeah.
Either one?
Would the 25th be a better,
I'm off on the 25th.
okay.
If that works for everybody.
Let's do our final meeting on the 25th.
6 PM, I presume.
Yep, 6 PM on the 25th.
Here.
I think we have an, I think we're gonna meet.
I don't have anything on my stuff.
Give us just a minute, there may be an ethics committee meeting that night.
Oh, I think there is.
There is.
Hmm.
Okay, yep, I don't have that on here.
Or we could do Monday the 24th, if it's at 6.
Yeah,
Okay.
Works
okay.
for me.
Monday, the
Does that work for
24th at
everybody?
6 o'clock? Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, 24th at 6 o'clock
Mhm.
in this room.
Yes.
I'll need to see if this room is available.
Okay.
And then
Can you
Yeah.
let us know,
Um,
please?
Yeah,
perhaps.
the only meetings that I have on here on my community calendar is the library board, and they meet at the library. So,
Okay. Well, if you can just double check.
mhm.
Just
Check on
make
that
sure
for us.
Something didn't pop up that we didn't know about
Yeah.
on the
Right,
calendar.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
So,
So we have a meeting at 1 o'clock this coming Friday.
mhm,
Meet at Dawson Tire
yes.
and tour. And then the 24th at 6 o'clock here.
Now, in the middle, do we want to have a public opportunity to view? Or if we just said during next week, during the office hours of the village, that there would be displays available and written surveys, as well as something that maybe comes out in the Gov delivery. Then we don't necessarily have to have a meeting.
Hmm.
But is that going to look like we're trying to push something through? If the
Yeah, because
Public
it's not a
isn't-
very, it's a pretty tight time frame in order to
Yeah.
push out a survey, would be my only concern. Right.
I'm game for anything,
Yeah.
as long as we can accomplish our deadlines.
Yeah.
Would staff be able to coordinate with us on writing a survey and putting it out in that tight of a time frame?
Well, we definitely could get it out. I mean, I'm not sure about writing. I mean, certainly we could put some questions. You might be just as far ahead to just give brief synopsis
Mm-hmm.
of each project
Yeah.
and give people an opportunity to say, there'll be some display boards at the village office on a couple of different daytime and nighttime hours to come up and just view them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they could leave comment there.
Mm.
So, I mean, personally, I don't think a week is enough time to do an annual.
Right.
I'm thinking like middle of August
Mm-hmm.
to have enough time to get the word out and
Right.
and let everybody have an opportunity.
Because they need to make people aware that
Right.
that's out there.
Right.
I'm
Put
wondering.
some mass blurbs out there that
Mhm.
this is what's coming, make sure you go to the village offices and check it out, whatever. And
Which is why I think, even though I understand it's not everyone's favorite mode of operation, perhaps just opening up that meeting on the 24th to public comment, right? If we publish it, immediately, essentially, that this is when the next committee meeting is, this is what's going to be discussed and recommended to council. If, these are the options that we're weighing. If you have thoughts about this or feel strongly about it, please come and share at the
Mhm.
meeting. That way people have at least a couple weeks to consider that and to review whatever materials that we have. Right?
Yeah, if we feel we need to be that tight, or if we want to do the public thing in the middle of August and do our final meeting more the end of August, if you think 4 weeks out, you would be able to attend a meeting.
I hope so. Sitting at home for 4 to 6 weeks is gonna drive me utterly crazy. But, I mean,
If we did that, I agree with that, you know, 1 week is kind of, we're pushing
it's
fast.
tight.
And if we slowed it down and allowed that time frame for the public, and then scheduled our meeting more the end of August to help you,
If that will allow us enough time
or
before
even
we
the
have to
first week
start.
of September, as long as we have our meeting
Yeah.
prior to the September council meeting.
I agree. That would be enough time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, so then.
And we wouldn't want to go any farther than that because,
right, yeah. No,
So
I
then
think,
Yeah.
scrap the 24th?
sure.
Okay. Delete. Okay, so then August, we have a village meeting on the 8th.
And so we could easily have the stuff available by then to even just have it out in the hallway here during that meeting, and then for like 2 weeks after that, available outside the village offices for viewing, and then to be safe for you, Debbie, maybe
29th?
we can do the 29th, or we could do the 5th.
5th of September?
Mm-hmm.
I would
That's
say
the
you
day
do
after.
Labor Day week then.
Yeah,
I would do the 29th.
okay,
28th or 29th,
yeah.
that's the week before.
okay.
So,
Let's do the 29th,
okay.
8/29.
8:29,
At,
6 PM.
August 29th.
August
Yes.
29, yes,
6 PM.
okay?
I'm sorry, guys.
That's okay.
I've been waiting for months for this.
I scribble stuff. No, that's perfectly
I'm
fine.
not supposed to talk, but I think that makes more sense too.
Mhm.
And I think transparency to the public is something you guys need to work on. I think that's lacking in the township. So I think that's a good move. I'm not gonna say no.
Okay. August 29th. Okay, then
Okay,
we're good.
so we're
Good for you?
kind of set
Yeah.
on what we'll do.
Good for you?
We're
Good.
Good.
Thank you. Nothing else from anybody? Staff?
The 24th is canceled?
Correct. Yes,
Or we should say move to August 29th
yeah.
at 6
So
p.m.
what, August what?
August
August
29.
29,
At 6
Sorry.
PM.
That's the only meeting.
yes, the only physical meeting. There
Except
will
for
be,
the-
there will be surveys and viewable items prior to that.
And the tour this Friday.
Pardon me?
And the tour this Friday.
Correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
the tour is still this Friday,
Yeah.
the 14th at 1 PM at the former Dawson Tire location. Okay? Nothing else from staff?
Nothing.
I want to thank our ladies for coming to make your presentation as well,
Thank you
and the
very
work
much.
that
Thank
you've
you
put
for
into
your
it.
hard work.
And I think that is very helpful to us in this process, too. That's the idea, right? Then we will adjourn and see you on Friday.